In December 1987, inside IBM's laboratory in Boca Raton, Florida, a software architect named Ed Iacobucci watched his team press the first copies of OS/2 onto floppy disks. The operating system on those disks was built to replace DOS and to carry IBM through the next 20 years of computing. It did neither of those things. The code shipped late, ran slowly on the machines most people already owned, and within a decade, the company would write it off and dismiss nearly everyone who built it. Engineers who used OS/2 will tell you it was the better system. They are mostly right. It offered true preemptive multitasking, memory protection that kept one failed program from dragging down the rest, and a design years ahead of what Microsoft was selling. None of that saved it. The reason it lost is not the reason most people give, and the difference matters, because the same error is being repeated today by companies certain they still command a market they have already surrendered. This is the story of the operating system IBM built and Microsoft buried. You remember the weight of the box. If you bought OS/2 in the early 1990s, it arrived as a carton heavy with diskettes, and the installer asked you to feed them in one after another while the minutes passed. Your machine needed memory that cost real money in 1992, around 8 megabytes to run the system in comfort, at a point when many office computers shipped with 4. The workplace shell came up, and you saw capabilities no version of Windows offered yet. You could drag a file onto a printer icon and the document printed. A single misbehaving application could lock up and die while every other program kept running untouched. The system also brought a new file format that let you give a document a long, readable name instead of the 8 cramped characters DOS allowed. For anyone who had spent years rebooting DOS machines after a stray program wandered into the wrong block of memory, that stability felt like arriving in a different decade. 3 sessions could share one screen at once: a DOS session, a Windows session, and a native OS/2 session, each walled off from the others. The marketing line promised a better DOS than DOS and a better Windows than Windows, and in raw engineering terms, the claim held up. Programs reached the system through a clean set of calls whose names began with the letters DOS, a direct inheritance from the operating system OS/2 was meant to replace. Code could split into separate threads that ran independently, a way of working. Windows would not match for years. You configured it, you tuned it, and you trusted it with work that could not fail. Banks ran it. Airlines ran it. The trading desk down the hall ran it because it did not fall over in the middle of a transaction. Anyone who read the technical manuals rather than the advertisements knew this was the serious choice. And then the rest of the world walked straight past it towards something visibly worse, and you spent the next 30 years trying to explain why. IBM and Microsoft signed their joint development agreement in August 1985, and for a brief window, the most powerful company in computing and the fastest rising one in software were building the future together. The announcement came on April 2nd, 1987 in New York, paired with a new family of machines called the Personal System 2, the PS2. Matching names were deliberate, the operating system numbered to echo the machine so that buyers would tie the two together in their minds. Bill Gates put his own reputation behind the system without reservation. During a 1987 Computer World interview, he predicted that within 3 years, more than 80% of new Office systems would run OS/2. Writing the foreword to the OS/2 Programmer's Guide, he called it destined to be the most important operating system, and possibly the most important program of all time. Those were not the words of a reluctant partner. The expectations were enormous, and for the corporate market, they were partly met. Through the early 1990s, the system sold into banking, insurance, finance, and airline reservations, the accounts where reliability outweighed price and where IBM had sold mainframes for decades. The French National Railway, the SNCF, ran OS/2 in thousands of ticket machines. Telephone companies built control systems on it. Checkout registers and supermarket chains depended on it as well. Measured by corporate seats, the platform reached millions of licenses across its lifetime. IBM had reason for confidence on the hardware side, too. In June 1987, the company reported building almost 4,000 PS2 machines every day, and it expected that line alone to bring in $22 billion during 1988. Yet the contrast with its software rival was already brutal by 1990. By the time the partnership publicly fractured that year, Microsoft had sold around 13 million copies of Windows 3.0 in under 12 months. IBM, across more than 3 years, had moved roughly 600,000 copies of OS2, of which perhaps half were genuine sales rather than bundled inventory. Demand for Windows lifted the whole software company with it, carrying Microsoft from a firm of around 1,800 employees into one of more than 10,000. High-value accounts belonged to the better system. Everyone else went the other way. Follow the money, and the two companies were never playing the same game. Microsoft earned its revenue from a licensing model it had locked in years earlier. When it supplied DOS to IBM for the original 1981 PC, the contract let it sell the same operating system to every other manufacturer under the name MS-DOS. Each clone maker that built an IBM-compatible machine paid a royalty for every unit shipped, whether the buyer ever used the software or not. That arrangement turned the entire clone industry, every competitor to IBM's own hardware, into a stream of payments flowing toward Microsoft. Volume was the product. The more makers there were, the more royalties arrived, and the operating system itself was the asset that compounded year after year at almost no additional cost per copy. IBM earned its money the way it always had. Hardware was the product, and software existed to sell hardware. OS2 was conceived as a feature that would pull buyers toward IBM machines, especially the PS2 line, and toward the proprietary expansion bus inside it called Microchannel. To use Microchannel, a competitor had to license the design and pay IBM for the privilege, a deliberate reversal of the open architecture that had let clones flourish in the first place. The plan was to rebuild the control the company had lost. These two products could hardly have differed more in their economics. A copy of software cost almost nothing to reproduce once written, so each additional license was nearly pure profit. Every machine IBM sold, by contrast, carried the full cost of metal, chips, and assembly set against margins that clone competition kept shrinking. Microsoft was selling the cheapest thing to copy in the entire industry, while IBM defended the most expensive. Each side priced according to its model. In 1992, OS2 version 2.0 sold for around $195 as a standalone purchase, while Windows 3.1 sold for roughly $150 and, far more important, arrived already installed on the machine you bought. One company sold a box you had to seek out and load yourself. The other had arranged to be there before you ever opened your computer. Distribution decided the contest more than merit did, and Microsoft had spent a decade building that distribution, one royalty contract at a time. The usual explanation for what happened next is a story about a broken partnership. In this telling, Microsoft betrayed IBM, Windows 3.0 got lucky in 1990, the marketing was cheaper, and a superior system lost to a slicker campaign. Every part of that is true, and all of it together still misses the structural fact underneath. The durable value in personal computing had already migrated before OS2 ever shipped, away from the hardware and into the horizontal software layer that sat on top of it. Two things in that layer carried the value. One was the operating system licensing channel, the per-machine royalty that placed software on every computer, regardless of who built the box. The other was the application programming interface, the API, the set of calls that every developer had to write against to make a program run at all. Whoever held those two assets owned the platforms, and the hardware underneath became a commodity that anyone could assemble. Ownership of the API carried a second advantage beyond royalties, because the company that defined those calls got a head start building the developer tools and the applications that ran on them. Microsoft understood all of this with total clarity. IBM did not, because its entire history pointed the other way. For decades, the company had captured value by controlling hardware, end-to-end, selling integrated machines that locked customers in. And it tried to run that same play one more time. OS2 and the PS2 and Microchannel formed a single coordinated bet that the hardware, not the operating system, would once again become the standard that defined the platform and dictated its evolution. That was the old industrial logic sound for mainframes and wrong for personal computers. Tight integration of hardware and software was not absurd in principle, and Apple had shown the approach could work by controlling both layers and tuning one against the other. That model demanded a single company supply the whole machine, and the market for IBM compatible computers had already voted for the opposite, for many makers competing on price beneath one shared software platform. Rivals understood the danger of a proprietary bus so clearly that 9 of them banded together to define a competing open standard rather than pay to use microchannel. Look at the numbers that frame the decade, and the migration is plain. In 1983, IBM held roughly 76% of the personal computer market it had created. By 1986, the year before OS2 and the PS2 were announced, that share had fallen to about 26%. Clones had already taken the hardware, and value had drained out of the one thing IBM was best at controlling. So the technical superiority of OS2 was beside the point. It was a magnificent answer to a question the market had stopped asking. The company was fighting to win back control of the hardware in a business where control had relocated to software, while Microsoft simply stood on the layer where the value had pooled and waited. Whoever owned the licensing channel, in the AP I would define the next 20 years no matter whose machine ran underneath. That winner was not the one that built the better operating system. The split became public in 1990, weeks after Windows 3.0 reached the market that May, and began selling faster than anything the industry had seen. From there, the divergence accelerated. Microsoft took the work it had been calling OS2, version 3.0, renamed it Windows NT, and kept these deep technical ideas while abandoning the brand and the partner. IBM was left to carry OS2 alone, and it pressed forward with conviction. Version 2.0 arrived in 1992 as a full 32-bit system, entirely the company's own work, genuinely advanced and still climbing a hill that grew steeper every quarter. The deeper trouble was the one engineering could not fix. OS2 ran Windows programs so well that developers saw little reason to write native OS2 software, since the same code reached far more customers through Windows alone. The platform became a superb way to run a competitor's applications, which meant the programs people actually needed were always written for the other side first. Microsoft, meanwhile, controlled the Office software that mattered, and its own programs ran better on its own system. The applications that decided an Office purchase, the word processor, and the spreadsheet belonged to Microsoft, and they performed best on the platform Microsoft was promoting. Hardware support widened the gap further. OS2 lacked drivers for many common printers and for much equipment built by other makers, while Windows already reached a far broader range of devices and shipped preloaded on most new computers. A buyer who wanted Windows did nothing at all, while a buyer who wanted OS2 had to choose it, purchase it, install it, and hope the printer worked. Quality problems compounded the strategic ones, as later releases shipped with more than 20 service packs, some demanding more diskettes than the original installation. Reaching ordinary buyers proved just as hard, and a 1994 release called Warp, backed by a multi-million-dollar advertising campaign, still gave the home market no reason to pay for software that already came free on the machine in the store window. In 1994, Microsoft made IBM a direct offer. The terms allowed a Windows 95 license as favorable as the one given to Compaq, the largest manufacturer of the day, on the condition that OS2 development end entirely. IBM refused and chose to push its own system instead. Relations grew worse in 1995 after the company bought Lotus, whose Office suite competed head-on with Microsoft's. When the Windows 95 license was finally signed, IBM reportedly signed it only minutes before the Microsoft launch event began, far later than its competitors, and walked into the most important consumer software moment of the decade, carrying a machine the public did not connect to the new release. That same year, an internal review judged the entire product line beyond saving. Leadership cut the great majority of the budget, closed the development effort that had run out of Boca Raton, and dismissed more than 1,300 people. Spending in the final full year had reached around $990 million with no path to profit. What survived is more than the small community that still runs the system today. The clearest inheritance lives inside Windows NT, and every version of Windows descended from it, all of which carried forward design ideas first worked out by the joint IBM and Microsoft team. Ed Kobuchi, the man who opened this story, carried his own ideas out the door. He left IBM in 1989 before the public break and founded a company called Citrix with a group of engineers from the same world. His first products were built on OS/2, and the partnership war nearly killed the young company when it erased 18 months of work. Persistence carried him through. In 1997, he signed a 5-year joint development agreement with Microsoft to fold his multi-user technology directly into Windows NT Server, placing his work inside the very platform that had buried his old one. Citrix entered the NASDAQ 100 and the S&P 500 within a few years of its founding. The code underneath OS/2 outlived the brand in places most people never see. Automated teller machines ran it for years because it did not crash while holding cash. Banks and insurers kept it running on critical systems well into the 2000s, long after the desktop world had forgotten the name. The New York City Transit Authority built its fare system on it in 1993, and OS/2 was still connecting subway equipment to the central mainframe deep into the 2010s, quietly carrying millions of riders who never knew the name of the software counting their fares. After IBM stepped back, the system passed to other hands, shipping as Ecom Station from 2001 and as a modern descendant called Arca OS since 2017. Pieces of the code belong to other companies, including Microsoft, so the whole system could never be released as open source. Though IBM did open its scripting language, which still runs in active use. Support from the company itself continued until the last day of 2006. The engineers who built it went on to build much of what replaced it. What they made did not vanish. It went underground, into the machines you touch without thinking. Kobuchi died in 2013 in Boca Raton, the same Florida town where his team had pressed OS/2 onto those first floppy disks 26 years before. The next time a cash machine pauses before it counts out your money, consider that the patient code behind the screen may be the better system that lost, still running long after the company that beat it walked away. If you want more stories about the technology that won on merit and still disappeared, subscribe and stay with the channel.